I will sort of constrain myself to one basic statement that I want to propose and then explain a bit. The basic statement is that the whole package of modernity, which includes issues like citizenship and democracy, but also, of course, capitalism, is now exported to and imported by almost every country in the world. And this entails a certain configuration, and the configuration is that at the same time, modernity comes and installs a specific type of society, but at the same time, older power structures and social structures persist and are transformed. And the installation of modernity precisely makes these older structures invisible and therefore supports them. I will now explain this statement a little bit. In pre-modern states, you had inequality to a very high degree, but this inequality was visible, it was evident, and the power structure and the surface basically coincided. So it was evident if a feudal nobleman, for example, stepped in public that he was superior to, say, a peasant, and there was no debate about it, and it was obvious. The nobleman was born noble and he died noble, so did his children, and so on, and the peasant was born a peasant and died a peasant, and he was always inferior to the nobleman, and this was evident to everybody, it was visible. In a capitalist or modern society, this is different. In a capitalist society or modern society or democratic society, all citizens are supposed to be free and equal. We all are supposed to have equal rights. However, we can see, and this is an empirical statement, that inequalities persist. So we're all free and equal, but on some level we are not. Why is this the case and how is this the case? This is exactly what my statement refers to. What we have in this type of society is a divergence between what we might call the surface and the structure. Both are relevant, but they do not coincide. Inequality, as I said, in pre-modern states was the same on the surface and in the structure. It is divergent in modern societies. We can see this very nicely in, if you like, a founding pamphlet of modernity, which is Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. If you look at the very first pages of this book, you will see that on the first page, Adam Smith states that the free market, the market of free citizens, he uses those words, serves the interests of everyone best. We need a society of free and equal citizens. One page later, same book, one page later, he says, in this free and equal society, however, some need more and some need less, and the laborer needs less. He is content with less than the nobleman. So he takes inequality for granted because he was still living in this European feudal society, and for him it was evident that the nobleman had greater needs than the peasant. So after Smith, and if you like, exactly when Smith's book was published, this was the year of the American Declaration of Independence, democracy was installed and feudalism was done away with. Democracy dissolves Smith's feudalism, and we have a society of individuals, now truly of equal rights, and they are all supposed to be free and they are all supposed to be citizens. In this society, these equals fight, just like Adam Smith sort of diagnosed it and also wished for it, fight for capital, for rights, for status, and all of these things. Modernity is never finished. There are always problems on this level, and there's a constant struggle for capital, for status, for improvement, for rights, and so on. And it's never finished. It always goes on, and there's constant change. There's constant progress, because this was also implied that there is a type of progress towards better and more modernity. This is something we can observe, and we can also observe, along with this process, a functional differentiation, the process already diagnosed by Adam Smith, but better described than later by Durkheim and also, if you like, Parsons and Luhmann. They describe this process of functional differentiation, where we are all individuals, made individuals to fulfill certain functions in the division of labor that only we as individuals can fulfill, and not as social groups, but as individuals designed to meet certain demands of this functional division of labor. So on the surface, what we have is the society described by Parsons. For example, we have a society of functional differentiation and stratification according to capital and lifestyles. We compete for capital, and some of us get more than others. Some of us have a more prestigious lifestyle, a better name or whatever, and they have a superior, a slightly superior way of life, but they're still equals, and they're still members of this functional division of labor. However, all these struggles and all this improvement does not concern the substructure. All of this concerns what I would call the surface. There is a constant improvement, there's a constant social change, but the power structure itself never changes. And this is an empirical statement. It sounds theoretical, and it is theoretical, but it is based on empirical research. We have conducted studies in 4 continents, and we have conducted more than 1,000 interviews, and we have studied several nation states, and we have found in each of these states the same pattern, be it Germany, be it Brazil, be it Laos. We found the same pattern everywhere. With the coming of the democratic nation state of equal citizens, what happens is that the earlier power structures that are very diverse and very localized are transformed into a new power structure which is exactly identical with the old one. So the elite groups stay on top, the middle groups stay in the middle, the bottom groups stay at the bottom. They are transformed because they are no longer feudal groups. They are no longer nobilities. They are no longer possibly even caste groups. I don't know about India, but this would be a hypothesis that the caste order gets dissolved, but the same order persists under the surface of a democratic nation state. Why is this the case? Because the means of power, also capital and rights and so on, but especially the means of power are handed on from one generation to the next, and thereby the entire structure is reproduced. In spite of all mobility we have on the surface, in spite of some people getting rich for some time, the entire structure itself doesn't change. However, if we want to take the terms of democracy and citizenship in this more normative sense, I would suggest to look for new terms where even the power structure is tackled and something like a true democracy and true citizenship can be installed.
I'm very comfortable with Robin when he says that how pre-modern structures are transformed and they keep intact their values and their impact in the modern sense of the term. And therefore, the primordiality sneaks in the universality of modernity. The modern usually tries to emphatically talks about the universality, but slowly and gradually, when we see the functioning of the institutions, primordiality is writ large, and that is where people like us talk about that every person or every individual has a stake in modernity, democracy, and citizenship. And from that vantage point, as a stakeholder, there are certain questions which can be raised. Friends, 3 questions I want to raise as a stakeholder. One, when there are multiple traditions, can modernity be a modernity? Or there are multiple modernities? The first world modernity, second world modernity, and third world modernity can be debated. The second question is accessibility. Whether modernity gives access to the people in the institutions of governance. Especially, I'm reminded of 5 institutions, modern institutions based on universalistic criteria: polity, modern polity, university, judiciary, bureaucracy, and of course industry. These are 5 institutions now, and you can also add media. These are modern institutions, so-called, which contribute into the governance of the nation building process. And they are based on universalistic criteria. But when we start evaluating the outcome, we also gave equality of opportunity. And after that, we also gave equality of condition, that is reservation. But when we see the outcome of this equality project, this modernity project, this democracy project, the citizens project, we see the compositions of still are monopolized. There are people who have been still excluded. And I think, therefore, this whole notion of modernity as an ongoing project remains writ large. The last point, it's not only that first world, second world, modernity were different. The question was, even the founding fathers of sociology, as we say, DMW, Durkheim, Weber, and Marx, not BMW, the Trinity did not define modernity in totality. There are only certain portions which were defined. Weber talked about rationality, Durkheim talks about internal differentiation, Marx talked about class struggle. So, if the modernity project itself is not totally defined, how it's going to be achieved by the traditional society? I think that remains a valid question.
Three concepts: modernity and democracy and citizenship. If I were to link these 3 things, I think the certitude of the individuals and simultaneity with which the thought has been privileged over emotion is a specific marker of modernity, democracy, and citizenship. It is this particular a priori certitude that you arrive through thinking is the foundation of what we call it Western modernity and democracy. That the fact that you can choose what is right or wrong, what is good or bad for you, a rational choice. The figure of the individual as the repository of rationality and the only certitude that you can have is still haunts liberal theorization. Whether it is in political science, you think about liberal argument versus communitarian positions, or even in the disciplinary matrix, the kind of fight between sociologies and psychology. And within sociology, if you look at George Herbert Mead's work or Alfred Sue's kind of positions, or for that matter, when Durkheim says something out there as a collective social fact, and there's something like an interpretive sociology that Weber brings in, These are some of the issues that haunt our civilization, between the individual and the collective, between subjectivity and objectivity in different points in time. And disciplinary enterprises are part of that particular way of engaging with it. And these three issues reminds us of the same once again. You do not have democracy as we understand today if you do not respect individuals as that kind of a figure, who is the repository of rationality, who deserves dignity. And we know, as Charles Taylor often distinguished between, what he calls dignity from honor. The notion of dignity is rooted in the notion of a right-bearing individual. And honor is that particular status base of a traditional kind which has come up as a feature of a pre-modern society and so on. Now, from this vantage point, I would like to narrow it down to democracy first. Modernity reminds us of the certain essential values associated with it, not necessarily to be found in reality as such, but if you may like to call it in the Weberian sense, is ideal types, these values, something that we long for and we strive for. And that particular process makes us modern in that sense. But democracy, I think, how do we deal with this issue? Democracy is widely used and therefore it is also abused. It is used from affairs of the bedroom to the boardroom. You can always use this word, a relationship between husband and wife, not democratic, teacher-student relationship, not democratic. So it is widely used concept, and therefore we need a certain anchoring point. And I rely on political scientists for this. When they distinguish democracy in certain recent theories into procedural democracy and substantive democracy, I think when they refer to substantive democracy, it is those values and ideas that the individual's dignity must be protected, the freedom of the individual must be protected, and so on and so forth. And procedural, how to achieve this in terms of institutional mechanisms, elections, representation, and so on and so forth. Within this, if you see what's happened in India, I would like to link here the notion of democracy as a feature of modern and what happened to societies like India. I tend to agree more with people like Ashish Nandi. I would not use the word pre-modern. Rather, I would prefer to use the word non-modern. So the question to be asked for all of us is, what happened with these particular normative and institutional features were brought into our society, to the non-modern society? What kind of conversation happens? Do we have democracy? Does it enable us to move beyond the status-based societies where the individual's dignity can be recovered, or for that matter, community's dignity can be recovered? I want to flag off two issues in terms of the citizens here. Think of the Dalits, for example, in the recent times. What is the figure of the Dalit as a citizen? What kind of image we have it? In the recent cartoon controversy, for example, there is an overriding tendency to see a certain kind of sensibility as the sensibility, and other sensibility is something to be rejected. For example, you have lost a sense of humor. You're supposed to find it funny. What I find funny should be funny for you as well. Or if you react, look at this is too emotional. Now this is what I said, cogito ergo sum, privileging of the thought over emotion. That's why the natives, the children's, the primitives and the neurotics are considered to be inferior being in the beginning of the Western modernity as such, because they don't have this rational faculty, they are all emotional. Do you realize that we still have this? When a woman speaks, when a Dalit speaks, somebody who is marginalized, you said this is an emotional reaction. And I often remember this feminist off-quoted remark that hysteria is nothing but the medicalization of basic discontent of women under patriarchy. What you do is that by medicalizing, you just divert the whole issues. In a similar sense, the basic discontent and the oppressions and the marginalization of certain group of people, you will call it either as emotional, who has lost a sense of humor, and so on and so forth. And this is modernity, and how does it operate in India? The other figure, people in Kashmir and states like Manipur, Nagaland, and Assam. Under the Indian constitutions, right to life is protected under Article 21. There are due process of law and procedures to be followed. Even when you are guilty, the court has to announce the guilt. and the quantum of punishment will be decided by the judge, and death penalty is supposed to be the rarest among the rare. So fundamentally, I think these are some of the substantive issues that we confront when we talk about democracy, modernity, and citizenship in this country. Now, how do we deal with this as a social scientist? And I would like to end with this remark. What was in the surface, in Professor Boyke's term, what was in the structure, what kind of old forms have been reproduced in this part of the world, and the nation state as a very critical context for us to discuss this. In fact, democracy, modernity, and citizenship should be taken like being in the world. Within this particular context, that this text of modernity, this text of citizenship, this text of democracy must be addressed. Only then certain meaningful things will come up. How to deal with these issues? This modernity is not to be as a thing or themes. I was wondering, as social science students, particularly as sociologists, how would we deal with this? Is it possible for us to raise normative questions, or do we only need to with the empiricals? Is empiricism the only paradigm to be followed? Do we need a theory building of the logico-positivist kind, or do we do a post-structuralist sort of a position? Within that range of methodological concern, we must ask, for example, nation-state. Is it a domain of the political scientists or sociologists can deal with it? If you look at the Durkheimian sense of the social fact as the subject matter of sociology, and see where the state or the nation-state fits in even as an ideal type, as a social fact, and one would invariably find that a state is a social fact. And if a state and a nation-state is a social fact, the question comes whether the sociologists can legitimately study, or some political scientists will tell us whether we should only study the status, not the power dynamics of such institutions which have a critical impact on our life. Thank you.